I want to start off by saying that I'm a fan of Zack Snyder. I don't just like, but I actually love most of his films. And I did a review of Rebel Moon Part 1. You can check it out on the channel. I'll leave it in the description below. I wasn't a fan of that film, spoiler alert. And I say that to say I went to this one with a clean slate. I lowered my expectations, but still somehow Rebel Moon Part 2 still managed to be disappointing. Before we get into my thoughts of this film, I want to know yours in the comments below. Were you a fan of Part 1? Were you looking forward to Part 2? And of course, once you've seen this second part of Rebel Moon, what did you all think? Let me know your pros, your cons, favorite moments, least favorite moments. And do you want to see more from Zack Snyder in this IP? Do you want the video games, the comic books, the spin-offs, the continuation of the story? Let me know in the comments below. So as I like to do, I like to start off with the positives first. And positively speaking, I will say, jumping straight to the action, the last hour is the only thing that made this film watchable for me. It's Zack Snyder at his best. It's non-stop action. It's very impressive moments of action, and he continues to show that he can make very entertaining set pieces look just straight up cool. Performances from Sofia Boutella, Djimon Hounsou, and Skrein were underserved by the story, but still do a compelling job in the performances, and they really know how to sell the physicality in their roles. Now again, the last hour of this film is non-stop action. It's a war film, and there's some fun to be had there, but unfortunately, outside of the action, this might be one of my least favorite Zack Snyder films. Jump into my criticisms. I can't believe we spend the first and second act, basically the first hour of this film, on this stupid ass farm. I hate that we spend the first hour of this film on this damn farm about these people that I didn't care for. At least in Part 1, we went from different planets and saw different environments and different creatures. This one was just so stale. It's filled with yet again flashbacks of us seeing these character stories and completely cuts off the pacing. We get Korra's backstory involving the princess as we're watching the village prepare to get their grain all set up. It's done in slow motion. We have the, again, I want to repeat, the first hour of this film is on this farm, and it is literally watching these people harvest the grain and trying to build this type of connection with the villagers, and it just didn't work for me. Now again, I don't want to dismiss the last hour of this film, and again, it's cool. That's Zack Snyder's favorite word, and it was cool to look at visually, but it's on this farm, and the scope and scale is just non-existent on this dull looking farm. Main fight is on this very bland farm, and the farm just has no sense of urgency and made the stakes feel low risk and non-existent. On top of watching these untrained farmers prepare for a fight against an army in less than a few days was just laughable. The romance between characters, including Korra and Gunnar, was just a joke, as this movie lacks any sense of depth or development of character or story or any attachments to these characters. Now, one of the major flaws I had with Part 1 was, okay, these characters look cool, like they look like they're straight out of a video game, and they physically look like they can be these characters, but who are these characters? And this film does give us the backstory of all of our characters, but in a way that just felt just kind of underserved. We get their backstory that felt pointless. It's a recap of like a minute of their history with the evil empire, and it just was lifeless and dull. It's so frustrating to watch Part 1 and Part 2 because it has all the tools, it has all the makings and the blueprints of something new and unique and fresh, but unfortunately Zack Snyder and his co-writers just aren't the right people to write this screenplay. Instead, the film is only focused on looking cool and giving you cool things instead of for actually having an engaging narrative. It just felt like an empty, hollow sci-fi film that manages to make the characters who were somewhat interesting in the first one feel like they were just less of characters in this one. Again, as someone that considers himself a Zack Snyder fan, and I've seen most of his movies and I own most of them, this might be the first time, Part 1 and Part 2, where I can actually say I was bored for the majority of those movies. Ultimately, I don't think this franchise is for me. Part 1 I thought was bad, Part 2 I think wasn't good, and when you combine these two films, because it is a Part 1 and Part 2, like it literally picks up right off the Part 1, these films, because I do look at it as one story, might be Zack Snyder's worst films to date, in my humble opinion. This is coming from a Zack Snyder fan. So before I give you all my overall score, and if you should watch it over the weekend on Netflix, I want to take the time to thank you all for making it this point in the review. If you haven't already, consider liking the video, sharing your thoughts on the film, but also sharing this video, and also consider sticking around by subscribing to the channel. Overall, I went into Rebel Moon Part 2 with a clean slate and hope that it'll be better than Part 1, but unfortunately, Part 2 is just as bad, if not worse. Djimon Hounsou, Sofia Boutella, and Ed Skrein are excellent at capturing the action, but the script lacks any depth. While the last hour is a mixture of action and visual appeal, but the writing and the character development were just non-existent, this is another below-average Netflix sci-fi action film, and it pains me to say, as a fan of Zack Snyder, but again, I feel like this might be his worst film to date. I'm going to give Rebel Moon Part 2, The Scargiver, a 1.5 out of 5. Now, even though I didn't like these films, and I personally do not want to see more from this franchise, I might give the Zack Snyder cuts a chance, because as he continues to hype up this film, which, by the way, the build up to Part 2 was just like so bad on the marketing part, but as he keeps talking about, apparently the Snyder cuts are completely different movies, so I might just watch those. But besides that, I'm done with this franchise, and I still am a Zack Snyder fan. I still like his work. I just want him to move on from this, because I don't think he's the right person to tell this story, which I know that he loves and he's been wanting to tell for like over a decade. But it just didn't work for me. You might disagree with me, and that's fine. We'll talk about it in the comments. But Part 1, Part 2 were just bad movies. So let's talk about it in the comments below. Pros, cons, favorite moments of Part 2. Which one do you like more? I think I like Part 1 slightly more than Part 2, but that's not saying much. But let me know your thoughts on that. Again, I'm a Zack Snyder fan still, but this Rebel Moon stuff just isn't my cup of tea. But thank you all for watching today's review. Again, consider liking, sharing your thoughts, sharing this video, and subscribing to the channel. Hope you all are staying safe, and I'll catch you all on the next video.